On December the 25th, 1989, Nicolae Ceaușescu and his wife Elena were shot by a firing squad in a military barracks outside Bucharest. The footage was broadcast to the nation that evening. 4 days earlier, Nicolae had stepped onto a balcony in the center of Bucharest to address a crowd of 100,000 people. The crowd had been bussed in from factories and workplaces across the city. Their job was to cheer. State television was broadcasting live to the entire country. Ceaușescu began to speak, and then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, the booing started. His face changed. Live, on camera, in front of every television set in Romania. The dictator, who had held the country in a grip of fear for 24 years, looked confused. He raised his hand. He tried to speak again. The crowd was no longer listening. The television feed cut to a test card. When it returned, Ceaușescu was still on the balcony, still trying to speak, and the crowd was still booing. The fear that had held Romania together for 42 years broke in that moment. What happened in those 4 days between the balcony and the firing squad, and whether what followed was a revolution, a coup, or something the world has never quite had a word for, is still being argued over 35 years later. To understand why the booing mattered, you have to understand what Romania had been. By December 1989, every other communist state in Eastern Europe had begun to change. Poland had held free elections. Hungary had opened its border. East Germany had watched its wall come down. Czechoslovakia had carried out its Velvet Revolution. In Romania, nothing had changed. There were no roundtable discussions, no reforms, no opening. Romania, under Ceaușescu, was the most repressive state in the Eastern Bloc, and it was getting worse while everyone else was getting better. The instrument of that repression was the Securitate, the secret police. By the 1980s, the Securitate had 11,000 agents and a network of between 500,000 and 700,000 informers. In a country of 22 million people, as many as 1 in 30 Romanians was spying on their countrymen. Phones were tapped, mail was intercepted, apartments were bugged. Every typewriter in the country had to be registered with the authorities so that dissident writings could be traced back to the machine that produced them. You could not tell a political joke without risk. You could not speak to a foreigner without being reported. An American academic named Catherine Verdery, who conducted research in Romania during the 1970s and 80s, later obtained her Securitate file and found it ran to nearly 2,800 pages. She had been followed, photographed, wiretapped, and reported on by people she considered friends. The Securitate gave her code names: Folclorista Vera. They filmed her in her hotel room. They tracked her meetings back in the United States. If a foreign professor warranted nearly 2,800 pages, imagine what they kept on their own citizens. The Securitate's files on the Romanian population, if laid end to end, would stretch for 26 kilometers. Romania was not a country with a secret police. It was a secret police with a country. Ceaușescu had been in power since 1965. In his early years, the West had courted him. He had broken with Moscow over the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. He had welcomed Richard Nixon to Bucharest. He had maintained diplomatic relations with Israel after the rest of the Eastern Bloc cut ties. For a time, he was the West's favorite communist. By the 1980s, that man was gone. In his place was a megalomaniac who had demolished historic churches, monasteries, and entire neighborhoods to build the Palace of the Parliament, the second largest administrative building in the world after the Pentagon. To clear the ground for it, he razed a fifth of Bucharest's historic center, including 19 churches, 6 synagogues, and 3 Protestant churches. Tens of thousands of people were forcibly relocated. The building was a monument to nothing but itself, a palace for a man who believed his own country existed to serve him. His wife, Elena, was deputy prime minister and insisted on being addressed as academician doctor engineer, despite having no genuine academic credentials. The couple lived in opulence while the country starved. In the mid-1980s, Ceaușescu had imposed a program of extreme austerity to pay off Romania's foreign debt. He succeeded. By 1989, Romania was debt-free. Its people were hungry, cold, and watched. The shops were empty, the heating was rationed, the electricity was cut for hours every day, and the Securitate made sure nobody complained. The revolution began not in Bucharest, but in Timișoara, a multi-ethnic city near the Yugoslav border, 450 kilometers to the west. On the 16th of December 1989, the authorities attempted to evict Laszlo Tokes, a Hungarian Reformed pastor who had spoken out against regime policies. His congregation formed a human chain around his church. They stood in the cold and refused to move. Romanians from the neighborhood joined them, then Hungarians, then Serbs, then Germans. In a city where the regime had spent decades turning ethnic groups against each other, people of 4 nationalities stood together in front of a church and said, "No." The protest spread from the church to the streets to the city center, from the city center to the factories. By the 17th of December, the Securitate and the army had opened fire on unarmed demonstrators. The exact death toll is still disputed. The official figure is 72. Some sources put it in the hundreds. Ceausescu, speaking on state television, called the protesters foreign agents and hooligans. Timișoara was sealed off from the rest of the country. Telephone lines were cut. The state media said nothing. The rest of Romania heard only rumors, passed from person to person, whispered in kitchens and workplaces. On the 20th of December, Timișoara declared itself a free city. The army had withdrawn. The people controlled the streets. It was the first city in Romania to be liberated from communist rule, and Ceausescu decided to respond not with concessions, but with a display of strength. He called a mass rally in Bucharest for the following day. 100,000 people were ordered to attend. The intention was to show the nation on live television that the people of the capital still supported the regime. What happened instead was the balcony. The speech began normally. Ceausescu praised the achievements of socialism. He denounced the events in Timișoara, and then the crowd began to shout, not chants of support. Boos, whistles, the word Timișoara shouted from thousands of throats. Ceausescu stopped speaking. His hand went up. He said something no one could hear. For a moment, the most powerful man in Romania stood on a balcony in front of his own capital city and did not know what to do. The state television director, watching in the control room, cut the feed. Millions of Romanians watching at home saw the screen go blank. When the Berlin Wall had fallen 6 weeks earlier, Romanians had watched it on their televisions and felt nothing change. Now their own screen had gone blank, and they understood what it meant. The regime was afraid. When the feed returned, Ceausescu was trying to offer wage increases. The crowd was no longer listening. By nightfall, Bucharest was in open revolt. People poured into the streets. The Securitate fired on them. The revolution had reached the capital. The next morning, December the 22nd, the army switched sides. Defense Minister Vasile Milea was found dead. The official verdict was suicide. It was widely believed to be murder, punishment for refusing to order his troops to fire on civilians. With Milea dead and the army defecting, the Ceausescu's position collapsed within hours. They fled the roof of the Central Committee building by helicopter as demonstrators rushed the entrance below. The pilot landed shortly afterwards, claiming they would be fired upon. The couple commandeered a car, then another. They were recognized, chased, and caught by local police in the town of Târgoviște. Ion Iliescu appeared on state television that evening as the leader of a hastily formed National Salvation Front. He announced the Ceausescu's arrest and promised justice. What happened next is the part of the story that has never been fully explained. After the Ceausescus fled on December the 22nd, the shooting in Bucharest did not stop. It intensified. Gunfire erupted across the city. Snipers fired from rooftops and windows. The army returned fire, sometimes at its own units, in the confusion. State television reported that Securitate loyalists were waging a last-ditch war against the revolution. The country was told it was under attack from terrorists. Over 900 of the revolution's approximately 1,100 deaths occurred after Ceausescu had already fled. But when the shooting stopped and the bodies were counted, no Securitate loyalist terrorist cells were ever found. No organized resistance network was ever identified. Later analysis, including by Romanian prosecutors, suggested that the post-December 22nd violence may have been deliberately provoked, a manufactured crisis designed to create a sense of emergency that would justify both the hasty execution of the Ceaușescus and the seizure of power by the National Salvation Front. The revolution was real, the terror that followed it may not have been. On the morning of December the 25th, Christmas Day, the Ceaușescus were brought before an exceptional military tribunal at a military base outside Bucharest. The trial lasted approximately 90 minutes. Every member of the panel was a military judge. The charges included genocide, subversion of state power, destruction of public property, undermining the national economy, and attempting to flee the country with over $1 billion in foreign bank accounts. The genocide charge claimed over 60,000 victims. The actual death toll of the revolution was approximately 1,100. The $1 billion in foreign accounts was never found. The order to convene the tribunal had been handwritten in a lavatory in the Ministry of Defense. The firing squad had been pre-selected before the trial began. Nicolae Ceaușescu refused to recognize the court. Elena Ceausescu told the judges they had no authority. The lawyer appointed to defend them observed that since the defendants did not recognize the tribunal, there was no mechanism for appeal. The prosecutor, in his closing statement, told the court that while he would normally oppose the death sentence, this case was different. The judge's own verdict allowed for appeal to a higher court. The Ceaușescus were executed approximately 5 minutes after the sentence was read. Romanian law at the time prohibited carrying out the death penalty less than 10 days after sentencing. Every procedural safeguard was broken. The verdict had been decided before the tribunal sat down. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Day, 1989, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were led into a courtyard at the military barracks. Their hands were tied. They were stood against a wall. Elena screamed as she was positioned. Nicolae began to sing the Internationale. The firing squad, 3 elite paratroopers selected from hundreds of volunteers, opened fire before the film crew covering the event was ready. Only the last rounds were captured on camera. 120 bullets were later found in the 2 bodies. The footage was broadcast on Romanian television that evening and released internationally 2 days later. The Ceaușescus were buried 5 days after their execution in Ghencea Cemetery in Bucharest. They were the last people to be executed in Romania. 12 days later, the new government abolished the death penalty. They killed the dictator, and then they made it illegal to ever do it again. The courage of the people who stood in front of tanks and bullets in Timișoara and Bucharest was real. The hundreds who died for the right to boo a dictator on his own balcony died for something that mattered. Romania is a democracy today because of what happened in December 1989. But the question of what exactly happened has never been settled. Ion Iliescu, who took power, was a former communist official who had fallen out with Ceaușescu but not with the system. The National Salvation Front was staffed by second-tier party members. The Securitate was formally dissolved on the 30th of December. Its officers reported to work the following week under a new name. The intelligence service that replaced it, the SRI, reportedly retained a third of the former Securitate staff. The files that stretched for 26 kilometers were transferred to a new archive, but years are missing, pages are gone, and the people who compiled them are still alive. The Romanian-German Nobel laureate Herta Müller wrote that Ceausescu's secret service was not dissolved. It simply renamed itself. Whether December 1989 was a genuine popular revolution hijacked by opportunists, a coup disguised as a revolution, or something more complicated than either description allows, is still the most contested question in Romanian politics. The dead are real. The courage was real. The freedom that followed, imperfect, contested, and incomplete, is real. In the years after the revolution, Romania held elections, joined NATO, joined the European Union. The shops filled, the heating came back, the typewriters no longer had to be registered. But the people who had compiled the files, who had informed on their neighbors, who had built the surveillance state from the inside, were never held to account. Romania never carried out a full lustration. The informers who had reported on their friends and colleagues for decades continued to live in the same apartment blocks, shop at the same markets, sit in the same churches. Everyone knew who they were. Nobody said it out loud. The Securitate's legacy was not just the terror it inflicted. It was the silence it left behind. The full truth of those 9 days may never be settled. Romania was the only country that killed its dictator. It is still the only country that cannot fully agree on what happened. If your family has a connection to Romania, to the revolution, or to the Securitate era, tell me in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this.